Hi, everybody. Welcome to our monthly Hope for Mental Health community, August 23rd, 2020. We're so glad that you've joined us today. It's the middle of summer here on the west coast of the US. If you're watching from someplace else in the world, you might be in a different season, but here we're in summer and it's hot. And so we get not only in California, we get the heat, and we get, unfortunately, a lot of fires. And my absolute favorite, we get ants. It's like the ants decide that, hey, this is the time to come up and get out of the heat in this ground. Let's go and look for the cool kitchen in Kay's house and hang out and have a party. So the ants have been hanging out in my house this week. I imagine some of you have been dealing with those little critters as well. But we're so glad that you're here. It's awesome to be together. These are hard times, and the more that we can be just with each other and have time to be to renew our hope and to learn a little bit more about something of interest in the field of mental health and spirituality, the better. It just equips us to go back out there one more day and do it with hope and with joy and with the sense that we're not alone. And you're not. You are not alone. You are with us today. God is always with us. And no matter how much it feels like sometimes that you are doing life by yourself, you're not. And God has promised He will never leave us. And He has promised that we could be together. It's not the same way that it's always been, but here we are. And so today, if you're feeling a little bit alone, just want you to know that we're thinking, put some comments in the comment section, and we'll respond and just let you know that we're so glad that you're here. Some of you have known that Pastor David Mondani, our pastor of mental health here at Saddleback Church for the last 3 years, contracted COVID-19 in June. And in fact, his wife did, and so did one of their children. And Pastor David was seriously, critically ill for several weeks, and we weren't sure that he would live. It was that serious. And then many of you have asked how he's doing, wanted an update on his health. And so I want you to watch this. We have a video from Pastor David Mondani.
Hello, friends. This is David Mondani. I just wanted to give you a few updates with how things have been going with me this past few months. Some of you may not know, but I was actually in the hospital towards a better time of late June and early July for COVID-19. I was actually admitted to the ICU for 15 days and have since discharged. And a lot of things have come out of my time during this last season that I wanted to share with you. I am incredibly grateful. I'm grateful for two reasons. The first reason is I'm grateful for the people of God, that is you, for your prayers. I believe my life was saved because the people of God, the church, has stepped to the plate, and out of their faithfulness, out of your faithfulness, you prayed for my healing. You prayed for my healing. And for that, I wanted to thank you so much from deep within. Thank you so much for taking the time to pray for me. And I'm happy to report that though I'm not fully recovered, I'm out of the danger zone. You know, when you're fighting for your life and you're in critical condition and you're close to death, it makes you really think about certain things, because I really felt loved. I felt so loved by you in so many different ways, loved out of this process. And the second reason I'm grateful is because the people of God, Saddleback Church, this community, stepped to the plate in very visible and tangible ways. You brought me meals, you sent texts and updates and emails and encouragement, and all of that has served to provide an incredible amount of strength to my family and to myself. In fact, my wife also contracted COVID, and so did my 12-year-old son. There were times when we didn't know how we were going to cook dinner, and at that right time, someone knocked on the door and said, "Here's dinner." And that's the church. That's the church stepping to the plate. That's Saddleback Church. I'm grateful for you. I'm thankful. I'm so thankful that you got to be a part of ministering to me. And I in turn just got to glorify God and to say that He is my healer because of you. So thank you for that. I do have an announcement that I want to make before I go. Back before all of this COVID happened in my family, I began to be touched and encouraged and prompted by the Lord to go to graduate school and get my doctorate degree. And Melissa soon began to confirm that. In fact, during my time in the hospital, it was very clear, without a doubt, that I was to pursue my doctoral studies. And because of that, I want to follow His heart. And I will be starting graduate school actually today, which is Wednesday. You'll be getting this on Sunday. And I'll be leaving Saddleback Church. And for what that means for me and a lot of you who I've been able to connect with is that there's grief and there is loss, and I'm so sorry. But at the same time, I want to pursue His heart. And so Saddleback and this community will have such a special place in my heart. I love working with Kay, Warren, and the team. I love being able to be around you and in connection. But here's my greatest hope, which is part of my research interest in my graduate studies, is I hope to research the call and the role of the church and how to care for people who've been impacted by mental illness. With COVID, it was not surprising that there was such an outpouring of love from the people of God and the church, this local assembly called Saddleback. Yet at the same time, if there was a mental health crisis, my heart grieves because I know it's not yet the same, where people who go through a crisis and a near-death experience don't get the kind of support or help on such a visible and great level. And so my prayer is that one day God will allow His church, who are in different things, different places, to, in tangible ways, walk with and journey with each one of us when there is a mental health crisis. And I know there are a lot of great churches out there doing some good work in this area, but it's not quite there yet. So let us pray. Let us pray as a community. And I want you to know that I'm praying for each of you. I'm praying for this community. For many, including me, it's been transformative. It's brought hope and resilience. It's brought so many connections and fellowship. And so for that, I'm grateful too. I love you, my friends, and I don't want to say goodbye, but I will say I hope to see you again. God bless you.
You heard the surprising news that Pastor David said that he has left staff at Saddleback and is now pursuing his doctorate. He didn't tell you where he is pursuing his doctorate. It's actually at the King's Seminary, which is in the Dallas area. And I have to tell you, as somebody who loves David as a friend and a brother in Christ, it broke my heart when he told me that he and his family were moving. But I also have to tell you that as his big sister in the Christian faith, I'm a lot older than him, and as his big sister, all I could tell him was, David, I cheer you on. That's what a life of faith is. It's hearing God talking to us, hearing God speaking, hearing God leading, and us responding in faith, taking those gigantic steps of faith that sometimes include moving, changing locations, changing schools, completely changing jobs. And so Pastor David and his family are getting established in the Dallas area. And so I want you to be praying for him. It's miraculous how God has healed him and is restoring him and his family to health. And if you'd like to send him a note just of thanks, because I know that many of you benefited through these years from his kindness and his compassion. He's been there for you in some really rough moments in your life, and you'd like to thank him. And so you can drop him a note at mentalhealth@saddleback.com, and we'll make sure that those notes get forwarded to him. And so I hope many of you will take the time to express your gratitude, your appreciation for him, and then let him know that you're going to be praying for him. So I want to do that right now. I just want to pray for Pastor David and his family, and then we'll go on with today's program, and I'll introduce you to our speaker. Father, I thank you for the miraculous ways that you brought David and Melissa and Caleb through COVID-19. It was so scary, God. It felt like every moment was going to be a message that he didn't pull through. And just by your incredible kindness and grace, you healed him. You have allowed him to live, and you have allowed him now to recover and heal. Would that continue? We pray that you would heal every part of his body that was affected by COVID-19 for Melissa and for Caleb. And God, we also pray for them as they settle into a new place, a new state, a new home, new jobs, new schools for the boys, new neighbors, everything new and different, as they're also recovering from such severe illness. So would you give them strength? Would you give them emotional and physical and spiritual strength? Would you help David as he really applies himself to study? He's such a good student and has such a desire to know more and become an even more effective minister for you. So I'm asking that you would meet his heart's desire and do exactly that. We pray for friendships, relationships, settling into that neighborhood, finding a church where they can feel very much at home, where they can serve. And we look forward to the day that we get to see them again. We're so grateful for the years that Pastor David poured his life out into the people here at Saddleback Church and around the world, the churches that he helped in Rwanda and other countries and other places that listened to his wisdom. So would you bring the next person, the next way, the next way that we will move forward here in our mental health ministry at Saddleback? All of this is in your hands, and we trust you. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So today, I wanted to talk to you and have a very special speaker for you, because as we are talking about COVID-19, I mean, you can't talk about anything else. The two main topics of conversation, I think three right now, are COVID-19, the election, and school. And those are all very weighty and big topics. I heard a speaker this week on another program I was watching, and she said, you know, when COVID-19 first started here in the United States, most of us saw it as, we approached it like we would approach a blizzard or a flood or a torrential rain or something. It's like, this is bad, but we can get through this. We just gonna hunker down. We're just gonna go inward for a couple of weeks where we've all got our water and our toilet paper and our wet wipes, and we're ready to go. We are gonna get through this. And we just hunkered down because we thought it was gonna be short-lived. And then we started to realize that rather than it being a blizzard and something short-term, it was actually more like winter. This was going to take longer. It was going to take some we're going to actually have to invest in some winter coats, and we were going to have to do things differently because this was going to last longer than we initially thought. And then it has slowly dawned on us all that rather than it being a blizzard, rather than it being winter, this is more like being in the ice age. And we actually have no idea when this period of time, when this challenging time in history is going to change and take us back to any semblance of normality. So if anything, we have to have a different strategy. And of course, that trickles down into every area of our lives, from employment to the way we do church, to the way we do our jobs, and especially to education, especially to how our kids, how our students, how our young people, how our college age and university students, how they go about their education. Well, so this puts parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles and friends and neighbors all together in this big mixing pot of how do we help our kids the best that we can in this time of living in the ice age for a time and a period that we don't quite know how it all is going to come together. And so today we've invited Dr. Casey Call. She's the Assistant Director of Education at the Institute of Child Development at Texas Christian University. Dr. Call earned her master's degrees in elementary education and counseling, and then a PhD in developmental psychology from Texas Christian University. She worked as an elementary school teacher and a middle and high school counselor. And through these educational experiences, she developed a passion for teaching, learning, and improving educational systems. Dr. Call is dedicated to serving children and families from hard places and bringing trauma-informed interventions into systems of care. She's married to Brian, who is a lieutenant in the Fort Worth Fire Department, and they have 2 children. And I'm just absolutely delighted to have her as our guest today. And after she gives a presentation about support for families and kids as we go back to school, then she and I will spend some time just talking together and doing some questions and answers, and maybe some questions that you put in the comment section. But please welcome Dr. Call. I'm so glad you're with us today.
Thank you, Kay. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm just going to talk about how, because we're living in the ice age, I like the metaphor that Kay was talking about, and living in Texas, I can understand living in the ice age, but it's been like 100 degrees every day here. I was watering plants this morning, and the leaves were actually like, they were baked. They were turning brown on the edges, and it was like they had been cooked crispy. So I wish we could get a little bit of the ice age weather maybe, but not so much of the everything that we're dealing with right now. So I am going to talk to you today about how do we go back to school, and how do we do that in a trauma-informed way. So what does trauma mean? What does it look like? And how do we help our kids who are either in the classroom or doing online learning? And so I'm really happy to be here today. I think that the Hope for Mental Health community is such a great resource. And in preparing for this presentation, I went back and watched many of the episodes, and I just learned so much. And so I'm grateful for this resource, and I'm grateful for being invited to talk about this. So let's start with what is trauma, because we hear a lot about trauma-informed care. And so when we're talking about trauma-informed care, we need to have the basic definition of what trauma is. And SAMHSA describes the criteria of trauma as a physically or emotionally harmful event that could potentially be life-threatening. It has lasting adverse effects, and it causes significant impairment in function. So when we're talking about trauma, it's got to be something that harms us physically. So when you think about trauma, many people will think about medical trauma or something like that, or a car accident, or emotionally. So when we think about what we're going through right now, and we think about all the emotions that are tied together with that, and then we think about it's going to have lasting adverse effects. When Kay was talking about, we thought it was a blizzard, right? If the coronavirus had been just a blizzard, if we had been, hunkered down for a few days, and then we came out of it and we emerged, we wouldn't probably have that many lasting adverse effects. But now that we've gone into a season and now a whole time period where we don't know how long it's going to last, we don't know what the effects are going to be, right? We don't know, will people ever go back to shaking hands? I heard a podcast about that the other day. What will be the social norms for greeting people? We just don't know what the adverse effects are going to be. And then causes significant impairment in functioning. So I don't know about you, but I know that during this shelter in place time, I've experienced a lot of things such as, I can't focus. Sometimes I feel like, oh, this is great. I love all this extra time with my family. This is going to be wonderful. And then other times I'm like, I don't know how long this can last, right? So it's significantly impairing the way that we function in our day-to-day lives. When we talk about going back to school in a trauma-informed manner, how do we prepare for that? We think about, okay, so we're in the middle of a global-wide pandemic. We're not able to be close to many people, right? Many people are feeling isolation. Many people are feeling fear because we don't know what's coming next. We also have going on in the United States, culturally based traumas. And so many people, as a result of that, are feeling isolated, are feeling fear, some of the same emotions and expressions that are going on. So we have a lot of, going back to our definition, we have a lot of events that have the potential to be emotionally traumatizing, right? And then we've got the illness, the COVID-19, which can be physically traumatizing if you contract the virus or if you get ill. And so when we talk about going back to school, there's many opinions on how we should do it and when we should do it and what's the best way to do it. And I have two kids who are starting new schools this year. One is starting middle school and one is starting high school. And my whole philosophy has been, I just want them to feel connected to their community, their new community. I want them to feel like they know what's going on, like they have a plan. I want them to feel like they're welcome, like they belong somewhere, even if they're doing online school, right? And so when we think about trauma and trauma-informed care, the way that I guess the very simple way to explain how trauma affects our brain is I like to look at to describe it like an upstairs and a downstairs brain, and this comes from the Whole Brain Child. They describe your brain as upstairs and downstairs, and your downstairs brain is what's responsible for fight, flight, or freeze, for keeping you safe, for keeping you breathing, digestion, sleep, all of those things that happen, you know, kind of automatically. And then you've got your upstairs brain that's responsible for things like planning, thinking, learning, socializing, connecting with other people, being creative, being flexible, being mindful. And so we've got our upstairs and our downstairs brains. And when we're experiencing trauma, what happens is our downstairs brain is working overtime. So our downstairs brain is getting all this experience and it's getting really efficient at recognizing trauma and recognizing when we're safe and when we're not safe, and it gets all this practice and all these experiences, and it gets really, really good, and it stays on high alert, right? And it's lots of practice at fight, flight, freeze, or flight, or or fold. And then when our upstairs brain doesn't get a lot of practice, right? It's kind of offline because we're kind of living in our downstairs brain during times like this. We don't know how long it's going to last, so we don't have any predictability. Our routines have changed. Our communities have changed. The way that we go to work and school and church has changed. And so everything is just kind of up in the air, right? We don't have those things that we can count on. So we're kind of living in our downstairs brain. And so when we think about trauma-informed care, and when we think about how do we bring that type of care to our students and how do we bring that type of care to our schools, we have to think about how do we bring the top part of our brain back online, because we want both of our, the upstairs and the downstairs brain to be working together, right? If our kids are going to school to learn, they have to have access to the prefrontal cortex, the upstairs part of their brain. And so when we talk about trauma-informed care, that's basically what our goal is how do we bring our upstairs brain online and quiet our downstairs brain. And so I wanted to talk a little bit more about how trauma affects we talked about how it affects our brains, and I wanted to spend a little bit of time on how it affects our bodies as well. I shared a little bit about, some days I feel great. This is awesome. This is, I can go on. And then other days I feel kind of sad and hopeless and lonely, and I don't know what's going to come. And so I feel very fearful. And so when we think about how does trauma affect our bodies, it can either turn it on or turn it off when we think about our different systems. And so when we think about our sensory system, we can either become hyper aware and alert of things like sounds or smells, or we can become hypo responsive, which means we don't really notice much, right? So we can go one way or the other. And the same happens with sleep. We might even be sleeping more than we normally are. We might turn to sleep as something that is a coping mechanism, right? Or we may not be able to sleep. We may lay in bed wondering, with all this anxiety and all of this stress, what's going to happen? I wonder what tomorrow's going to look like. I wonder what the COVID numbers are going to be, right? I wonder what's going to happen. And the same with physical activity, not being able to participate in our regular routines. Are we getting more physical activity? I know in my neighborhood at the beginning of sheltering in place, everybody would be out walking. And I mean, it just seemed like everybody was, going to be so healthy by the end of this. And then now that it's, 104 degrees outside, maybe we're not going outside as much as we were. So we either going to get a lot of physical activity, or we might be getting less physical activity because we're at home more. Same with hunger. We may feel more hungry than normal, or we may feel less hungry than normal. And with thirst, we may not remember to drink water because we never get thirsty, or we may, be down in it all day because we're at home and we have access to it. So trauma affects our brains. It kind of puts our upstairs brain offline, and it affects our bodies, all of our different senses and our kind of regulatory systems. So what do we do about that? How do we expect our kids to start school? I know a lot of kids started school last Monday, and then, some will be starting over the next few weeks. And so how do we provide them with what they need to get the upstairs part of their brain online and to regulate their bodies? And that's really what a trauma-informed approach means, whether you're talking about a trauma-informed school or classroom or organization. It means there's kind of three pillars of trauma-informed care. This comes from a scientific article by Howard Bath. And what he talks about there's three pillars of trauma-informed care, and they are safety, connection, and coping. And it doesn't matter which program you have, in order to be a trauma-informed program, they have to address all three of those areas. And so one of the things that I think is really important for schools, if we want to set our students up for success, set our teachers up for success, set our parents up for success, is we're going to have to be proactive in making sure that all three of these pillars are in place, whether we're in person at school or we're doing homeschool. And so we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about each one of these pillars, and then like some real practical tips for how do we apply these, whether we're at homeschool or we're in school. So the first pillar is safety. And when you think about living through trauma or being traumatized, and you think about your upstairs part of your brain being offline and being in a constant state of fight, flight, or freeze, right? I'm in a constant state of flight, fight, or freeze. So I don't feel safe. I'm constantly scanning my environment, saying, okay, what's going to happen next? Am I okay? Who's coming? Who's going? Where am I going? What's going on? I'm hyper vigilant because I don't feel safe, right? I don't have that place to feel safe. So one of the things that we need to do in order to kick off our back to school in a trauma-informed way is to create a safe space for learning. And we can do that in a variety of ways. This makes me think about attachment theory, which is kind of how I frame everything. And when we think about attachment theory, we think about kind of babies and how they develop trust and how they develop their voice. They do that by having a trusted adult that meets their needs, right? That's warm, that is consistent, that is nurturing. And they do that over and over again. And eventually the infant learns, I can trust this person, right? They listen to me. I must be pretty special, right? And when that happens, then they are able to have kind of a model for how relationships work. And this is the same kind of, it reminds me of attachment, because we have to create that same safe space within our schools or within our homes in order for our children to be able to take the risk, to be able to speak out, to be able to do discussions, to participate in discussions, to be able to try challenging work, to be able to meet new friends, to be in a class with new teachers. And so safety is really important. We need to create a safe space. And if we do that, we will be able to earn trust, right, from our students or from our children. We'll be able to help them develop self-efficacy, which means using their voice. Self-efficacy means when I say something or do something, it has an effect on people. So I have a voice. I have, what I do matters. And we also help them create self-worth, because if we are safe adults creating a safe space, then they must be pretty special, because we're here for them. We're here to help meet their needs, right? And to scaffold them and help them to learn. And if we create that safe place, not only will they develop trust and a voice and that feeling of preciousness, but they'll be more willing to take risk. And that's really what we want them to do, because learning online is it feels risky, right? It feels risky to have your video on and to unmute yourself to participate in a discussion. I taught my first college class yesterday, 2 of them, for this semester. And that was the whole goal of our first class, is how do I create a safe space? And we're going to talk about what does that look like. In order to create a safe space for our children, for online school or in person, we have to be adults who are dependable, who are wise, and who are kind, right? We'll talk about this in a few minutes, but we have to be able to regulate ourselves and to be thinking about what are we bringing to this interaction before we can create a safe space. If we're out of control or chaotic or unorganized or don't know what we're doing or just unsure of ourselves, then we're not going to be able to have that safe space, hold that safe space for our children. A huge part of creating a safe space is predictability. And when I was talking about our downstairs and our upstairs brain, predictability helps us to say, hey, downstairs part of our brain, calm down. Look, I know what's coming next. I know that every time in math class, we do a timed, a multiplication test first, and then the teacher teaches us a lesson, and then we get in small groups, and then we have individual work time. I know what this is going to be like, so I can let my guard down, and I don't have to be hypervigilant. I can use that upstairs part of my brain to solve my math problems, right? So predictability is huge. And we do that. Another way that we create predictability is through establishing routines. So having the same format in your classes, if you're doing online classes, if you're working at home, creating that predictable routine and schedule at home. So, okay, you've got a Zoom meeting at 9 every day. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to get up at 8. We're going to, have breakfast, brush our teeth, get our area set up for the day, and make a list of the things that we need to do. But we need to have some routines into our schedule and even into our classes. Another thing, schedules. So post schedules, put them on, use an app for a schedule, have an agenda if you're teaching online at the beginning of each class. Okay, here's what we're going to do. That predictability really helps to calm the bottom part of our brain so the upstairs part of our brain can come online. And another way to create safety is to set our students up for success. So how do we do that? We have to be really proactive about setting up our students for success. So what can schools do? What can teachers do? And what can parents do? I think about it on kind of all 3 of those levels. If you know that your child needs a snack every hour, every 2 hours, make sure that they have one, right? Set a timer. Help them. How do we set them up for success? If we know they can't sit down for an hour and a half Zoom, then let's, stack up some books and set the computer and let them stand up, right? Let's have, a lot of breaks. And we're going to talk about these tips in a little bit. Another thing that can help create a safe environment if you're participating in online school is to not require the video and microphone be on for virtual meetings. And the reason for this is that some children may not want their background and their home life and the sounds from their home being shared in their classroom. I think one of the things that we're doing at TCU is that we're strongly encouraging it, and we're, teaching students how to use the virtual backgrounds if they want to, but they also have a choice. They don't have to participate with their video and their microphone. They can participate in class using the chat function on Zoom or some of the other features. I think for some people that really creates some safety. I know that yesterday during one of my classes, I told my students that I was not going to record the session, and I had 2 students say thank you to me in the chat box. They said, thank you, that makes me feel like we're going to have a that I'm more willing to take risk if it's not going to be videoed and people aren't going to go back and watch it. So there's other classes that I have to video parts of it for, lecture parts for students. And, that might be the part, maybe you just don't video discussions. So we want to create a safe environment for our students and for our children in order for them to be able to take risk and to get their, to kind of calm the bottom part, downstairs part of their brains. The next thing we're going to do for having a trauma-informed back-to-school program is to focus on connection, relationships. I think every school, every classroom, every teacher needs to spend the first week or more working on connecting with each other, connecting with the students, getting to know them, letting the students get to know each other. That's how we're going to create safe space. That's how we're going to feel like we belong. That's how some of that isolation and loneliness is going to be resolved, right? And one of the ways that we can create connection is we have to make sure that we are balancing structure and nurture. And when we up the structure, we have to up the nurture also. And so when we think about online learning, I think about all the structure that's in place that is so different than an in-person environment. So in an online learning environment, the expectations are very different, right? In a classroom, you can get up and sharpen your pencil and get a drink of water, and you move and you go to specials, or you go to electives, or you have this movement. You have candid conversations, your anecdotal things that you're sharing with people. You greet people when they walk in. So you have all of this connection that's going on. But when you're in an online learning environment, that's all taken away, right? So our expectations are we're going to come to this place and learn and do work and, have our lessons. And so our expectations are a lot different. If we're in a in-person environment, our expectations are we're going to have to keep a mask on. We have to be physically distant. We can't touch each other. I think about being an elementary school teacher and not being able to hug my kids or give them high fives or pats on the back. And I just don't even know how I do that. So we're upping the structure on what our environment's going to look like, whether we're at home or we're in an online learning environment. And when we up the structure, we also have to up the nurture. And so when we think about how do we create a nurturing classroom environment, we have to make sure that we are conveying our warmth to our students, or if we're the parent, that we are conveying our warmth to them about our expectations for learning, right? That we're flexible. I think that is a huge one, because our expectations are so different than what they typically are, that we're going to have to be flexible and bring our students along to get up to these expectations. Joy and play and humor are surefire ways to up the nurture. One of the things that we like to say here at the Karen Purvis Institute is play disarms fear. And when you think about it, you can't be playing and having fun and joking around with somebody and engaged with somebody in a really fun manner, and also at the same time be afraid and hypervigilant and scared, right? So we want to create, if I'm the parent and my children are learning online, I want to make sure that we're doing this. I'm not the warden, right? I'm not hammering down. I want to make sure that I am approaching online learning with flexibility and warmth and nurturing and all of these things. So we have to balance our structure and nurture. And this is my favorite quote, or one of my favorite quotes, from Dr. Karen Purvis. And she says, "If a child needs nurture and I give them structure, I harm his ability to trust me." So if a child is needing nurture and I give him structure, I harm his ability to trust. And if a child needs structure and I give him nurture, I harm his ability to grow, right? So I think that is just something really important for us to keep in mind with online learning and going back to school, is that we have to keep in mind, how are we going to balance this structure and nurture? Another part of connection is, here are the kind of practical things, like what can we do? I think the most important is that we're mindful of ourselves, whether we're teaching or supervising or assisting or helping, is where are we coming from? I used to always joke with my students and say, oh my gosh, I'm such a good parent when I've had sleep and I've eaten and I'm not stressed out and I, have had exercise and all of these things. And if all of those things line up, like, not very often, then I'm a great parent, right? And so we need to think about how are we coming to the situation? If we're teachers, if we're parents, how are we coming? Are we taking care of ourselves to be able to be mindful of how we're coming to the situation? And then other ways to create relationships. I really like doing a check-in with students, or even with my kids. Last night, the one that I did with a class was, what's your favorite kind of candy? And then last night I went to the store and got all their candy to encourage them to come by my office, to one-on-one, so we could meet in person. Another check-in I really like is, what's your stress level on a scale of 1 to 10? And everybody can just hold up their numbers. Another one is, what are you doing for self-care this week? With little kids, it could be, if you could be any kind of animal, what kind of animal would you be? Doing a check-in allows everyone to listen to each other. It also allows everyone to have a voice and to be able to share something about themselves. With older kids, you can, after you've established your connection and your safe community, then you can go deeper. What is one hope for this semester, and what's one fear that you have? We did that in one of my classes yesterday. We did a hope and a fear. And so as we build our community, our check-ins can get, a little bit deeper, but we want to give everybody an opportunity to speak, which leads us to our next one, which is give voice. We talked about self-efficacy earlier, and giving voice. We want to make sure that we are allowing the space and the time for every student to have a part of the class, right? To have some ownership over the class, and to be able to share kind of their thoughts or concerns or feelings. Giving voice is really important. It's kind of like, it's that self-efficacy piece. It's when I say something, it matters, and that's and it's an effective way to build a community. We also want to give space for kids to talk about things that they're concerned about. We don't know, we don't know what's going on in every online session, in every online, in every assignment or things like that. We don't know what's going to happen. So being able to just give some time after the day, or at the beginning of each day, what are you nervous about today? Or what are you looking forward to today, right? To make it positive. So giving space for our kids to share what they're concerned about is a way to build connection. And then again, I'll say this at every, pretty much in every part: safety, connection, and coping. Play and humor is a way to disarm fear and to bring connection and relationships. So any way that you can be playful. In one of my classes yesterday online, we did an activity where we said, like, my name is Casey and I like to hold babies, and you had to do a motion that went with the thing that you liked. And so anytime we can, move around and have fun together and kind of be playful with each other is really helpful. And I think if you've got your little ones or your big ones at home that are doing school, I think it's just really important to have a purposeful attitude and again, be the person that's on their team, be their coach, not the warden. That's what Dr. Purvis used to always say. And then rituals are like routines, except they have they're purposefully connecting. So like brushing your teeth every morning is a routine, but reading a book with your mom at night before bed, that's a ritual, because it's something that's a routine that's made for connecting. So if you had a group, some way that you start your class, or some way that you start your morning, or a way that you say goodbye, anything that you can do to connect and have, something. I was watching a nurture group video from Saddleback, and all of the families put their hands in together, even virtually. Everybody put their family in and, said super family and, screen, and that was kind of their goodbye. So anything we can do like that to create rituals are good ways to connect. And then the last part of trauma-informed care is coping. And what coping means is regulation. So coping, if we think about coping with our feelings or coping with our behaviors, what that means is learning how to regulate them, right? Not screaming at a boss when we get upset and, tearing off out the door. So we want to be able to help our children cope and help them learn to regulate during this difficult time. And the way that regulation develops is, you can see on the screen, it's, when we're born, we have to have somebody regulate everything for us, right? Our temperature, our food, our clothes, everything. So we're other regulated. And then as we start to grow, we become co-regulated. So we have someone mentor with us. So someone says, oh, it looks like you're upset. Hey, do you want to go take a walk? Or, hey, it looks like you're getting really frustrated with that toy. Would you like some help? Right? So then we have co-regulation, and then eventually from co-regulation, self-regulation develops, right? Which is what we're aiming for all of our kids. So the coping part is, how do we help our kids regulate their bodies and their brains? And some of the ways that we do this is, I think, going to be the most challenging part. I think many of us are really good at being at creating safe spaces and at building relationships. But I think this part might be the most challenging. As I was thinking about where we're coming from and having to go into school, I was thinking about building endurance. I haven't been around a lot of people for, even virtually. And so to just sit here and talk to a class for an hour or an hour and a half, or as a student to sit and listen for an hour and a half, that I'm going to have to build up my endurance for that, right? I'm going to get overwhelmed I might be getting overwhelmed by people, right? I might be getting overwhelmed by having to focus for so long. I might be getting overwhelmed by being engaged with somebody for so long if I haven't been doing that over the last few months, right? So I think as parents and as teachers, what we can do is we can help them build endurance and not, and this leads to the next one, which is start small. So not expect, an hour and a half worth of focus and attention and small group engagement and large group engagement and partner engagement and all of these things right at the beginning. When I say start small, I mean, I think about like running track. And if you were going out to run track and you went out there and there was a hurdle that was up to your shoulders, I mean, I don't know about you, but I'd be like, I can't do this, right? But if I went out to, run hurdles and the hurdle was up to my knees, I'd be like, cool, I can do this. And I would run, I would jump those hurdles over and over again. And then if my coach raised it up a little bit, right, I would feel that success and be like, oh, I've got this. I can do this. And then as that hurdle gets raised up, I feel success again. And then I feel success again, right? So I'm going to start small and create all of these opportunities for success for our kids. So, wow, you did a really good job of participating in math today, right? That was awesome. You were focused, you were attentive. That was great. Or you did a great job for the first 10 minutes. That was awesome, right? So we want to start small. We want to give them hurdles that they can jump over. So they will feel success and they'll have motivation to keep going. Another way to help our kids regulate is to give them a lot of choices. And in schoolwork, in timing, in snacks, any way you can give them choices where it gives them some power and allows them to have that buy-in. We also want to set up their bodies and their brains for success. So if you're working from home, putting a cardboard box, that's what I did in March. I had a box that I just taped and I stuck my computer up on it on the dining room table so I could stand up and work. You can use books to, put your computer on in order for your kids to stand up. This is a tip I got from an occupational therapist. She said that if you've got little kids and their feet don't touch the floor, to put a box or something under there to help them. It just grounds them and helps them have a defined space so their feet aren't flopping around. We want to make sure that we're getting adequate breaks for physical movement even within our, our lesson time. Make sure that we can stand up or move around, make sure that we're getting, that our kids are getting snacks and meals, that they have water available for them. I think once you start to feel thirsty, you've already got like a 10% cognitive decline. And so we want to make sure that our kids are well hydrated. That's helping them set their bodies and brains up for success. We want to have some connecting activities, right? I was trying to think of, one of the things that we could do, if we're parents, we can go, do some connecting activities. Maybe it's not reading a book in the middle of the school day, but maybe it's, doing the thumb wars thing where you do this, or you do the hand slap game where you try to slap each other's hands, or you're like, hey, let's do 10 jumping jacks really fast, right? And we can do them together and we can look at each other. It might be telling jokes, playing hide and go seek, bouncing a ball to each other, throwing a ball, playing catch, something that is, that's going to kind of waken their bodies and their brains. Brain breaks are really important. It could be a call and respond game. I like a simple one that's from Dare Play is peanut butter jelly, where if I go peanut butter, then you would say jelly. If I say peanut butter, you would say jelly, right? So that gives my brain a break from trying to focus and attend to everything so much. There's all kinds of brain break things that you can find online. I know Go Noodle has a lot of really fun songs and dances and things for younger kids. And then sleep. We want to make sure that our kids are getting enough sleep, and that they're sleeping well, and that they're well rested, because that's kind of how we set them up for success. And then the last thing is we want to address when we're in fight, flight, or freeze, when we've experienced trauma, oftentimes we're not the most well regulated. So we want to think about how do we mentor that regulation, and how do we address behaviors, less than ideal behaviors in an ideal way. And the way that we do that is through the ideal response, which comes from trust-based relational intervention, which is TBRI, which was developed here at TCU. And we want to respond immediately. So within 3 seconds, if we can. If we see that our kids are starting to get restless, we want to be direct. Go right over to them and say, hey, it looks like you're starting to get wiggly. What do you need? Right? We want to be efficient. If they're just getting a little bit wiggly, we don't want to say, okay, let's stop and take a break. You can't focus, right? We want to give the least amount of intervention that kind of fits the behavior. We want to be action-based. So anytime we can have them redo a behavior, or, if anytime they can do it the correct way, they're going to have a deeper level of learning. So practicing the right way, how to do things. And then we also want to, when we respond to misbehavior, we want to make sure that we're doing it leveled at the behavior and not the child. So we're saying, you're a bad kid, but you made a bad choice, right? There's a big difference in those two things. And so when our kids do act up, when they do get dysregulated, I used to have a mantra to myself, and I would say, it is my job to help you regulate. It is my job to help you regulate, right? And so we want to remember that it is our job to help them to be the co-regulator. And we also want to keep the ideal response in mind when we're going through this. So going back to school is going to be, I think there's going to be a lot of challenges. I think there's also going to be some great possibilities, and some really creative people who are going to do some really great, fun ways. They're going to think of really creative and fun ways to get kids engaged. And I think there's going to be some really creative and moms and dads and aunts and uncles and grandmothers and grandfathers that are going to get creative on how to help with the homeschool as well. So I think we just need to keep in mind, we've got to build a safe environment. We have to find ways to make relationships, to strengthen our relationships, and then help with regulation or coping skills. So that's it. Thank you.
So that was awesome. I loved it. I took all these notes and have so many questions, and know that our audience will as well. I love the picture of the upstairs brain, downstairs brain. That is clear. That makes sense. I mean, I start to think of upstairs, downstairs, and the old Masterpiece TV show, but that's a whole different thing that probably most of the audience doesn't even know what that is. But the idea that when we're acting in one way, we're using the upstairs part of our brain, and when we're acting in another way, or thinking or feeling, that's the downstairs. Is that something that you also explain to children? Is that a helpful analogy to give to especially younger children?
It is. And if you, with little kids, you can say when they're starting to get dysregulated, but they're quite there yet. They're still, they still have their upstairs brain online. You can say, okay, how does your body feel right now? How does your brain feel? And you can kind of lead them through that. And then after, if they've been dysregulated, afterwards, you can kind of go back and say, were you able to calm yourself down? Did you need help? What could we do different next time? And kind of get them the whole goal is integration.
Okay.
So when we're talking about, we want to integrate the upstairs and the downstairs brain. And the way that we do that is through kind of that mentoring process of helping them learn how to regulate.
You've used a word several times, and I have learned what it means, but just in case somebody is, maybe new to some of the trauma-informed care or trauma-informed learning or things, what do you mean by regulated or dysregulated? Maybe somebody might need really just a little explanation of what you mean. Is that like somebody throwing a fit? I mean, that might, growing up, somebody said they threw a fit. Would that be the same?
That would be dysregulated. Yeah. We think there's one way to think of it when you think about a window of tolerance. And it's how, there's a couple of ways to think about it. So one way is a window of tolerance. And you think about that, what is it that you're able to kind of take and then, and to stay calm and alert and content and reasonable. You're able to use those higher level thinking skills. Like you could be flexible and creative and plan and connect with people and all of those types of things. And then when you go out of your window of tolerance, right, you're out here, when you're just out of it, you can still, maybe use some skills to bring yourself back down. But when you're really far out of it, you're completely, your upstairs brain is offline. And so when I say dysregulated, I mean, you're kind of in that fight, flight, or freeze state. Another way to think about it, and this comes from Dan Siegel, is when he talks about mindfulness, and he talks about like a hand model of the brain. So your fingers are the upstairs part, and then your thumb is your limbic system, and your palm is your downstairs, like your brainstem. And so when he talks about it, he talks about flipping your lid, and that's dysregulation, which I love that visual.
That's good. You put the term with the visual. That's really, I'm going to remember that one. Yeah.
I love that. And he talks about mindfulness being when we're about to flip our lid and we're able to bring it back down. So that's how we, and you think about, okay, what causes me to flip my lid? And this is what we teach kids too, but it's really important for adults to know it in order to be able to teach kids. So what is it that triggers me? What is it that causes me to start to flip my lid, right? And then what are those things that help me bring it down? And so we'll teach kids, it may be a sibling.
Yeah.
Calling them a name.
Right.
It may be maybe a math problem that they can't finish because they're used to it being easy, right? So what causes them to do that? And then what helps them? Is it help them to take a break, go for a walk, talk to somebody, ask for help, right? And so that's what it means to be mindful, is just to, when you're about to flip your lid, to recognize it and to be able to bring it back down through whatever works for you. And so I think
so. Just kind of something that occurred to me as you were talking, for kids who express themselves verbally, vocally, maybe they are the kind of kid who's on the floor having the tantrum, or the kid who's starting to scream, or they're just, it's very overt in the way that they flip their lid. How do you explain that, or how do you even notice it as much in maybe a child who is quieter, or who if you said maybe their sibling is the one who is very verbal but they aren't? How do you like teach a child to identify that they are about to flip their lid, but it's not in necessarily the way maybe their sibling does it?
That is a really good question. That's when we worked with families. And typically families with multiple children will have we call them externalizers and internalizers. So you've got the externalizers who, when they, get distressed, it. And then you've got the internalizers when, they might get really quiet, they kind of go into themselves. And so teaching a kid that, when you get quiet, what's going on? What are you feeling? And really look, I love the feelings charts. And you, with little bitty kids, you can just use pictures, or emojis are really, you can use emojis nowadays and you've got them on your phone, and say, did you feel like this one when you got really quiet? You don't want to do it in the middle of it, but afterwards, when they're coming back to a regulated state. I noticed that when you got that math problem was really hard for you, you just completely shut down. What was going through your body? How can I help you next time that happens?
I think it's interesting that you ask them what was going on in their body. I would tend to say, what were you thinking, or what were you feeling? But I hear you going straight for the body response, which it feels,
That's interesting. I've never thought about that.
But that feels like that's a completely different way to, and probably the last place that I would identify. So for me, has been a process for me of learning to connect with my body, what's in my mind. But I hear you went straight for twice. What was going on in your body, and talk to us a little about that.
I think the intention behind that is to help children develop a sense of what they are feeling and thinking, but to do that based on, like when you feel embarrassed, how does that feel in your body? What does that feel like? Because when you know what it feels like in your body, you can go back a couple of steps to, okay, what does it first start feeling like? What does it start feeling, like, what does that feel like? Do your shoulders get really tense? Do your hands get tense? Do you start fidgeting? Do you start breathing really shallowly? And we'll teach kids the difference between normal breathing and then breathing just from their throats. They might, I don't know. I think it's just really important for them, because oftentimes our body will react before we know what's going on. And so that's kind of the intention behind paying attention, teaching them body awareness.
No, it's brilliant. I don't think I've heard it expressed quite like that. And just even in my own interactions, both with my kids and my grandkids, or even talking to myself, or talking, when I'm analyzing myself or something, I'm sure that I don't go straight to what was going on in my body. I know that I go more to what was I thinking, what was I feeling. And I just was struck by that. And when we leave this conversation, I'm going to be thinking about that. No, seriously. And I'm going to be thinking about that even as I relate to my grandkids' range in age from like 8 to 17. So there's a variance there of how each of them is going to do that. But I'm really kind of excited to explore that a little bit more. So talk to us also about, you mentioned it, but so many parents are having to play so many roles, not only parent, but teacher. And so I think you said there toward the end, you talked about seeing yourself more as a coach, not a warden. I think that was the phrase that you used. But for the parents who are just feeling like this is literally too much. This is, okay, I did it during the blizzard.
Right.
I even did it during winter, but now I'm being asked to do it in the ice age over this longer period of time. And I just am simply not qualified, capable emotionally. It's too much stress. I mean, parents just need some strong encouragement. What do you tell them? What do you say to us?
Yeah, I'm thinking back to when I thought it was a blizzard, and this is embarrassing to say, but I made this schedule for my children, and it was this huge checklist, and it had like 20 things on it. And it was like, it was things for your mind and for your body and for your spirit. And I want you to, go around the neighborhood and pick up trash. And I mean, it was so,
oh boy.
I had really high expectations. And my 14-year-old at the time son was like, I'm not doing this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think it's really important for us to adjust our expectations to, okay, what is the minimum that has to be done during this? Because we're in this,
Right.
ice age, and we don't know when it'll end. What
Right.
is the minimum that we have to get done? And then to approach it like we're on the same team rather than it's a fight, right? So how do I come alongside you and help you? And yeah, I think parents have a very, very tough job. And I think another, so coming alongside, I would say trying to keep a sense of humor and making sure that you're really taking care of yourself. I think the self-care part is so important for parents because we are wearing so many different hats and
Right.
have so many responsibilities. And to be able to find the energy and motivation to do that, we can't have, our tanks can't be empty.
Yeah. I think sometimes I've thought of this a lot in the last few months, particularly as it relates not just to school, and educating kids, doing the home education, but also just sometimes I'm state the obvious, I am a white woman.
Yeah.
And so there are certain levels of privilege that I have that other people may not have. And I think about the fact that I live with a lot of stability. I have a lot of stability. My marriage is stable. Our income is stable. My home is safe. My health is good. I have a lot of the external things that make it easier for me to go through this ice age.
Yeah.
But then I think about other people whose job, my job allows me to sit in front of a computer and do a lot of Zoom calls, and I can do conferences, and I can do so much of what I normally do sitting here. And it works for me. But I really do think of the parents for whom working is not staying at home in front of doing their Zoom calls. They have kids that they're having to be the teacher for, but they also have to leave their home every day to do their job. And it may be at terribly inconvenient times as it relates to their children's schooling. And I just think that those parents have some pressures that I can't quite grasp. And I don't know that I don't know that we're all providing enough help for them. Or even, even the idea of self-care is sometimes can feel a little extravagant. Like, well, sure, if you sit at home all day and your job allows you to sit here and talk, then it's easy to get up and go take a break. It's easy to go say, oh, I need to go walk around the neighborhood for a minute. But when that isn't the reality, the reality is actually a lot harder for millions of parents. And so I just keep wondering and hoping and thinking, how can we help those who are the most vulnerable, for whom this is the most challenging, the most difficult? How do you put into practice self-care as a parent so that you're regulated and then wanting to, but you're also having to leave your home and I'm talking a long time here, but I really feel the weight of parents who are trying to do this with much more stressful environment and circumstances. How can we help? What can we say to them that is actually practical use for them?
Yeah, I hear you, and I feel the same way. And I'm constantly thinking about the parents who have jobs where they're working, out of the home during the day. How do they support their children in their schooling, and how do they do that? And self-care can seem extravagant. I think that I like to reframe self-care, and I do this with my college students as well, because they're oftentimes, they're very stressed out, and they're like, I don't have time to do that. And I'm like, when I think about self-care, I think about what is it, if you're on a 0 to or 1 to 10 scale on your stress and you're at a 10, what's something you can do that might bring you down to a 9? Mm-hmm. So it may not be taking a walk. It may be making a to-do list and checking that off, or making a chore list for your kids so they can, so they can start taking some of the load off of you, so you can kind of share the load. It's going to be something that lowers your stress a little bit, and it may not be extravagant. It may not be, doing a yoga class,
bubble bath and
right? Or going, it may not be.
Yeah.
But I think we've got to reframe self-care in a way that says, okay, what's one small thing I can do to lower my stress level? I eventually threw out my chart that I made, and I was like, okay, what's the minimum that they have to get done, right? And I was so tired of, of dishes and trash and all of that, being home all the time, which is also a privilege. But I was like, okay, so you've got trash on these days, you've got dishes on these days, and that might, so I don't know what it will be for those parents, but if they could kind of maybe think about something, that they could do. Maybe it's calling in help from a neighbor or.
Well, I like what you say about kind of just dialing it down. We might tend to think in extremes. Like I said, when you talk about self-care, get up and go, like leave this environment and go walk, or go take a bubble bath, or go whatever, something that might be more than somebody else could do. Just they're physically not going to be able to do that. But just the idea of ratcheting it down, just dialing down. What if it's not taking the stress all the way from a 10 to a 0, but is there anything you can do that would take it from a 10 to a 9?
Yeah.
That feels like within the realm of possibility for most people. That even if they can't, the ideal is this or that, but they can't get to the ideal because reality isn't going to allow for that. Right. But if they can dial it down, that has to help a little bit. And at this point in time, we've got to be grasping every little bit of help and sustenance and nourishment for ourselves so that we can help our families and our kids. I think that actually feels like it's a reframing of it in our minds. It's ignoring the ads that come on TV and tell you, you get in your sports car and you go drive around somewhere. It's like, yeah, right. Yeah. No. But I could maybe, instead of drinking water, maybe there is a flavored water in the refrigerator that, I don't know, I'm just making this up. I'm just saying it's not a huge shift, but it's something that makes me feel a tiny bit better. Than I did. And even probably helping our kids with that too, because they've got to be, when a kid has, maybe they start school at 8:30 in the morning and they have to go to 1:30 every day. I'm sorry, not many days are you going to be able to say to them, oh, we'll just stop at 10.
Right.
I mean, occasionally, but most of the time you're not going to be able. So it's like, so how do you help them last till 1:30 every day, or when some kids are really struggling? And just those small incremental things sound like they're important. A couple things that you said that I wanted to go back to. Would you, maybe parents know this, but just go into a little bit about the idea of redo. I like both from small children to maybe teenagers even. What is a redo, and how is that important in helping our kids cope and with hard circumstances?
Yeah, the redo is one of the tools that when I used to teach elementary school, I'm like, oh, I wish I'd known the redo. That would have saved me so many words and so much time. So for a little bitty, a 2-year-old, this happened to me the other day. We were playing with a friend's baby and with the bubbles, and she wanted the bubbles, and she's like, making that whiny face. And it's just saying, use your words and tell me what you want, right? It's allowing them an opportunity to redo it the right way. With a sassy 12-year-old, I'm not saying I know anything about this, but let's say that they roll their eyes and walk away from you. And let's say, you might say, if you had one of these 12-year-olds, you might say, hey, come back and try that again without rolling your eyes, right? Or if they slam the door, hey, let's try that again, but can you do it respectfully this time? So it's just allowing them to practice doing it the right way, because if they have that memory for doing it the right way, they're more likely to do it again. So is this a strategy I can use with my husband? That's all I want to know. Yes. My college students use it with their boyfriends and girlfriends, and Yes, I've heard it works wonders.
Tuesday, I'm going to tell Rick when I get it. Hey, the guest speaker today told me this great thing, and she said, so let's redo that. Let's try that again with them. We'll see how that goes over. So also, I was thinking of older kids, like teenagers. Again, talking about kids. It's got to look different. Parents have so much more control, and teachers have really so much more control when it's elementary. But when you're educating and you're working with your teenage, your junior high and high school, middle school and high school children, are there anything that you would adapt or do more of, do less of? Is it kind of look pretty much the same, just make it age appropriate, or what are your thoughts there?
Well, I think with the older kids, the more that you allow them to share power with you by giving them choices, being flexible, offering them compromises, I think the more buy-in that you can get by kind of sharing that power and allowing them flexibility and choices, the better they're going to respond.
Yeah.
I know with college students, I kind of will scaffold things. And so we might have an assignment where I tell them exactly what to do the first time, but then the second time they have more options. And then the third time they have even more options, so I think it allowing them some freedom and some decision-making as part of the process is really important. I would also say that I don't know. I think the building the endurance part, I think is going to be really important for even for the little kids, but for the big kids too, of, being, if they're not used to being around their friends or engaging as much, just kind of starting small with that and increasing the time.
In fact, that's probably be the closing question that I was thinking of was, building in that endurance. That's exactly what I was thinking, because we don't know, and kids do reach. I know as an adult, there are some days that I want to tear my hair out and say, I'm sorry, I can't do this another day.
Yeah.
Anybody who's been watching these Hope for Mental Health communities has heard me say that several times, because I really do have some of those moments. There are some days I really think I just don't want to do this. It's not that I'm in danger with my mental health. It's just I am fed up. I don't want to do this. I want life to go back the way it was. And I get angry and I get really irritable and kind of snappy. And if I feel that way and I'm, supposedly mature and all those things, I just try to think back to, and some of the stuff that I hear other parents saying about their kids, when sometimes their kids just go, I can't do this, Mom. And their mental health really does begin to decline. I have talked to a parent who feels like his son took his life in the spring because of the isolation and the stress that he just was like, I can't do that. Yeah. And so we're not just even talking about helping kids succeed in school. We're really talking, some of this is kind of life and death, particularly for maybe very vulnerable kids. Yes. Kids vulnerable to isolation, kids vulnerable to social, missing the social. So, as a educator, trauma specialist, mental health parent, all of those hats that you wear, kind of what are your closing words to parents trying to help their kids in this season?
That's such a good question. And I think really remembering what our overall goal is, and that is for the mental health. We can learn math facts later when we're out of the ice age. We can learn social studies dates and history dates and things later. I think that our overall goal needs to be our children feel like they belong in their learning communities, that they have strong connections with the people that are in their communities, their teachers, their peers, and that you don't ruin your relationship as a parent, right? As you prioritize that relationship, and it's a real difficult switch for some parents. I'm speaking for myself, to go from academics being a top priority to maybe coming down a little bit and saying, okay, this is not going to be my focus during this time period. My focus is going to be on creating healthy relationships and helping you learn to regulate and deal with your feelings and what's going on. And so I think just kind of refocusing our goals and our kind of expectations is the most important thing.
I love that. I feel like that's within the reach of every one of us, is that when we come through this season, no matter how long it lasts, it might not end in a, it feels like it started with a whoosh and all of a sudden we were off to the races. It may not end like that. It may gradually just kind of come to a new, a much quieter ending, if you will, as we just absorb some of these new routines into our normal lives. So whether it ends quickly like that, or it just becomes something that we do slowly, that focus on relationships that all of us can work to improve our relationships, to improve in our families that sense of security and belonging and nurture and in it together, that feels like goals that are really worth pursuing. And they're actually achievable. I might not be able to, my kid might not be able to learn as well facts during this time. But if they come through this period and season of their life more connected to me in a healthy way, and feel like they belong in this very strange and weird world, and that they will have the skills to navigate it, then I feel like we will have done a good job.
Sounds like success.
Dr. Cole, thank you so much for all that you're doing for vulnerable children and for sharing with us what you've learned and what you know. It's really an encouraging time together. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Friends, I will see you next month at our Hope for Mental Health community